There are times in human history when the question of war and peace becomes not only a matter of statecraft, but a matter of conscience. It is easy, on first reflection, to be drawn to the beauty of peace. The word itself suggests quiet fields, secure homes, children growing without fear, and the steady rhythm of a life unbroken by violence. Who would not desire such a condition? To prefer peace over war is not only natural, but right. Yet the question before us is not whether peace is desirable, but whether it can be had at any price. And here I must part company with those who claim that pacifism is the higher, truer way. The first difficulty with pacifism is that it rests on an assumption about the world that is not borne out by experience. It imagines that evil can be disarmed by refusing to oppose it with force. But if a thief breaks into your home to harm your family, your refusal to raise a hand against him is not a triumph of love. It is a betrayal of your duty to those entrusted to your care. To allow an aggressor free rein is not to elevate peace, but to abandon justice. If there is any moral order in the universe at all, it surely includes the duty to protect the innocent from the violent. Some argue that violence can never be justified because it always leads to more violence. But history gives us a sterner lesson. There are evils which, if unchecked, do not simply persist but grow. To refrain from resisting such forces is to cooperate with them by default. Peace purchased at the expense of truth and goodness is not peace but surrender. We deceive ourselves if we imagine that the world can be healed by letting wickedness pass unchallenged. I do not deny that the use of force is a grave matter. War is always tragic, and those who wage it must carry heavy burdens of responsibility. But tragedy is not the same as sin. When a surgeon cuts into the body to remove a tumor, he brings pain, but it is pain directed to healing. When a soldier fights to repel an invader, the violence he employs is not celebrated for its own sake, but endured for the sake of preserving what is worth defending. The presence of blood and ruin does not mean the cause is unjust, any more than the surgeon's knife proves his work is evil. There are those who appeal to lofty ideals and claim that love requires non-resistance in all circumstances. Yet love is not mere sentiment. Love is willing the good of another, and sometimes the good of another requires the strength to resist what threatens them. To shield a child from a tyrant, to defend a neighbor from cruelty, to guard one's nation from oppression. These are not denials of love, but its most demanding forms. Love without justice is a ghost. It has the appearance of virtue, but none of its substance. To be clear, I am not advocating for violence as a way of life, nor claiming that every conflict deserves the sword. The just man must always exhaust the possibilities of peace before resorting to force. He must weigh carefully the costs, the motives, the consequences. But when the line is crossed and evil demands dominion, when every appeal has been answered with mockery or scorn, when the innocent cry out for protection, then to stand aside is not holiness, but cowardice. Therefore, I cannot call myself a pacifist, not because I despise peace, but because I love it too much to entrust it to the goodwill of the cruel. Not because I think violence is noble, but because I know that sometimes it is necessary. To pretend otherwise is to live in a dream world, blind to the harsh but undeniable truths of our condition. A world in which no one resists evil may be peaceful for a moment, but it will not remain so. It will quickly become a world where only the wicked are free, and the meek inherit not the earth but the yoke. Peace without justice is not peace but surrender. Peace without justice is not peace but surrender. It is an illusion to think that harmony can exist when wrongs are left unchecked and cruelty is allowed to reign. True peace is not merely the absence of conflict. It is the presence of righteousness, of fairness, of the secure knowledge that the innocent are defended and the wicked restrained. To call a situation peaceful when evil men dominate and good men are silent is to abuse the very word itself. Silence in the face of injustice does not heal wounds, it deepens them. Appeasement does not tame the violent, it emboldens them. History bears witness to the truth that tyrannies grow not because of the strength of the oppressor alone, but because of the weakness and passivity of those who could resist but choose not to. Peace that is bought at the cost of ignoring oppression is not peace at all, but a thin cover for cowardice and neglect. There is a temptation to imagine that refusing to fight, refusing to confront, somehow makes one purer or more virtuous. Yet what is virtuous about standing aside while the innocent are trampled? What is holy about leaving victims defenseless in the name of keeping one's hands unstained? The reality is that justice demands action, and sometimes that action requires strength. A man who sees his neighbor attacked and does nothing is no friend of peace, for his silence has given the attacker the freedom to destroy. The responsibility to protect, to defend, and to preserve what is good is woven into the fabric of any meaningful peace. Without justice, what is called peace is simply the calm that follows surrender, and surrender never remains calm for long. To confuse surrender with peace is to misunderstand the world we live in. There are forces of greed, malice, and cruelty that do not cease simply because we wish them to. They are only restrained when confronted, only stopped when opposed. If one refuses to act, one leaves the field clear for the destroyer to proceed unhindered. Peace must be grounded in truth, and truth demands that wrong be named, resisted, and overcome. Anything less is not a lasting peace, but a shallow truce, one that will collapse under the weight of injustice the moment it grows bold enough to rise again. Love sometimes requires the strength to resist evil. Love sometimes requires the strength to resist evil. To speak of love as if it were only gentleness, softness, or quiet endurance is to diminish its true nature. Real love is not fragile sentiment, but a fierce and steadfast will for the good of another. It is easy to claim love when it costs nothing, when it demands only kind words or tender gestures. But when those we love are threatened by cruelty, when their safety is endangered by violence, love calls for more than tenderness. It calls for courage, for the readiness to stand in the way of harm, even if it means taking up strength against those who would destroy. To resist evil is not to abandon love. It is love in its most costly and demanding form. We must understand that to let evil have its way is not compassion, it is betrayal. If a tyrant raises his hand against the weak, and we fold our arms in the name of nonviolence, we have not chosen love, but indifference disguised as virtue. Love cannot be content to watch suffering without intervening. It cannot watch the oppressor strike without reaching out to shield the oppressed. The refusal to resist is not purity, it is permission, and permission given to evil is nothing less than cooperation with it. Consider the love of a parent for a child. No parent who truly loves would watch silently as danger approaches. The instinct of love is to protect, to defend, to place oneself between the child and harm, even if it requires strength, even if it requires force. In the same way, the love of neighbor, the love of community, the love of nation must be more than words or feelings. It must be a love strong enough to resist what destroys, firm enough to bear the weight of conflict when it cannot be avoided. To resist evil is itself a work of love, for it says to the innocent, "You will not stand alone," and to the oppressor, "You will not have your way." This is not hatred of the enemy, but fidelity to the good. It is not the rejection of peace, but the defense of a peace that is true. Love without the will to resist what is wicked is a pale and powerless thing, unable to guard what it claims to cherish, unable to protect those it pretends to serve. Real love, full and enduring, does not shrink from the struggle when the struggle is necessary. Refusing to fight the cruel is not virtue, but cowardice. Refusing to fight the cruel is not virtue, but cowardice. There is a dangerous tendency to mistake inaction for moral superiority, as if withholding resistance in the face of evil were a higher form of goodness. Yet what is truly higher about allowing the wicked to dominate, about permitting the defenseless to be harmed, about watching the innocent fall without lifting a hand? To refuse to fight when the moment demands courage is not an act of holiness, but of fear disguised as principle. Evil thrives where good men fail to act, and history is littered with the ruins of peoples who confused passivity with peace. Cowardice often clothes itself in the language of purity, insisting that violence can never be justified and that the hand raised in defense is stained beyond cleansing. But what of the stain that comes from allowing oppression to prevail? What of the guilt that clings to those who could have intervened but chose comfort over confrontation? The coward does not escape responsibility by hiding from the fight. He merely shifts the burden onto others, onto the weak who cannot defend themselves, onto the innocent who must suffer alone, onto the just who must face the battle abandoned by their fellows. Refusing to fight is not the absence of choice, it is a choice itself, and it is one that abandons justice to the mercy of the merciless. Courage is not sought because war is beautiful, but because life without courage quickly becomes unlivable. A society that refuses to resist cruelty surrenders itself into the hands of the cruel, and what it calls peace soon reveals itself to be bondage. Those who will not fight are not preservers of peace, but guardians of chains. It is no virtue to let darkness spread unchecked. It is weakness, and weakness that wears the mask of moral conviction is perhaps the most dangerous of all, for it excuses injustice while congratulating itself for restraint. To confront cruelty requires sacrifice, but to refuse to confront it is to sacrifice others in our place. The man who stands aside, claiming peace as his justification, is not sparing the world from suffering. He is simply transferring it onto the shoulders of the defenseless. True virtue does not turn away from responsibility when it grows heavy. True virtue accepts the burden and resists what must be resisted. Cowardice cannot build a world worth living in, for it leaves every treasure, truth, freedom, dignity, unprotected before the advance of those who have no hesitation to destroy.